Good evening and welcome back to Tropical Thursdays. I'm Chief Meteorologist Noel Ream.
And I'm Dr. Athena Masson.
We got a lot to talk about today compared to what we had last week. We've got Chantal weakening in the northern Atlantic. It actually became a tropical storm just about a day or so ago. We have a disturbance over the Bahamas, pretty close to the southern tip of Florida. And we also have the latest placement of a Bermuda high, which will factor in on what happens over the next several days in the central and northern Atlantic.
Now, so far we had Andrea, Barry, and now we have Chantal. Just 3 named storms for this season, though. We have a long way to go if we are to finish this list. And likely this year, we're not going to reach the end of this list. We're expecting an average, even a slightly below average hurricane season.
We're only at Chantal right now, and in my opinion, shouldn't have even been a tropical storm. What about you?
Definitely. If it were to have been named at all, it should have been subtropical storm Chantal, because it's forming just to the north of the Atlantic, right off the coast of Newfoundland, just to the south of it. That's subtropical waters, typically where we don't see tropical cyclones
and that's
forming.
Where the temperatures are usually slightly colder than the areas across the Gulf and at least the western half of the Atlantic. But Chantal right now winds up to 35 miles per hour, east-southeast at 14 miles per hour, situated right here. So by Friday, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 35 mile per hour wind. So it's going to stay more stationary in nature. The winds aren't going to move down at all. What's actually going to drive this is the high pressure system we'll show you in just one moment.
But closer to home, we are watching an area of potential development just off the east coast of Florida. Now, this little disturbance right now located over the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands, moving slowly to the north and going into prime conditions, warm sea surface temperatures, very minimal wind shear in this area. Right now, 10% chance of development over the next 2 days, but much better chance, 30% in the next 5 days. So Georgia, Carolinas even, start to keep your eyes very close on this.
And you talked about it is never too early to be prepared for any tropical system, especially late August and early September when we get closer to that peak and prime season for these tropical storms and tropical development to continue. So once again, as Athena said, right over parts of the Bahamas right now, we'll slowly track towards the north and northwest and eventually kind of skirt around the Florida, Georgia, and Carolina coastline over the next several days.
Now, all the way into the Pacific, Western Pacific, we're looking at Tropical Storm Bilu. And right now, this is just to the north of the Philippine Islands. Moving westward will likely impact the island of Taiwan. And Taiwan, no stranger to tropical cyclones at all, on average impacts 3 to 4 times every single year. So once again, they are used to these storms. So we'll pass Taiwan, and by later on this weekend, we'll hit mainland China. But right now, winds 60 miles per hour, pretty strong tropical storm, especially for the Pacific. Very broad rotation area, a lot of thunderstorm activity.
And there was another fun fact about Taiwan as well, right?
Yes, and Taiwan, even though it's just a very small island, it is the most hurricane-prone region in the world. It does get hit 3 to 4 times every single year. It's no stranger to seeing a super typhoon. Generally hits once a year. So always some destruction on that island, but they're very used to these types of systems moving in.
And thankfully, as it does continue to track towards Taiwan, as we head into the early part of the weekend, winds aren't going to be too terrible, but there's still something that people need to remind themselves with, that they will be dealing with a lot of rainfall and some pretty strong winds as this comes ashore. So we got the Bermuda high pressure. This is going to be the steering flow within the Atlantic for the remainder of this month and early September.
And right now for the month of August, just last week, this high pressure was very close to the continental United States. It is now pushed further offshore, but it has strengthened. It has even taken up a larger area, and that is a concern because all of this clear atmosphere right here, that is because of this high pressure system. Not a lot of activity, but just on the outskirts, we're seeing a disturbance, cluster of thunderstorms right here, just moving around it. We even have Chantal way out just to the east of that high pressure. But as this high pressure expands and strengthens, so we'll see more of a direct flow of tropical weather pushing ever so closely to the continental U.S.
Right. And another thing with this becoming a little bit further away from the area it was situated in last week, and it's actually going to allow Florida to dry out just a bit now. Showers and thunderstorms still will be possible over the next several days just due to daytime heating and, of course, the sea breeze collision that takes place there.
Yes, and we also have that disturbance just off the coast of Florida that will be bringing some rain, extreme outer bands of that, to Florida.
Something we're definitely watching pretty closely here in the Weather Center. Sea surface temperatures slightly warmer than what we had here last week at this time. We're talking around 90 degrees just south of Florida and north of Cuba, but temperatures hot anywhere you look across pretty much the Gulf of Mexico, out across the Atlantic. 86 to 90 degree water, bath water.
And since last week, we've seen most of these temperatures rise about 2 to 3 degrees. It's August. This is generally when we see those first major hurricanes starting to form. We should not be surprised. And we're also looking at wind shear. It is prime across the Gulf of Mexico, all the way out to the Caribbean islands and even into the open Atlantic. So if anything is forming in this area, we really have to be concerned about it, because prime conditions right now, the only areas that we're not seeing favorable conditions.
Pretty much where that high pressure sits.
Definitely, and just to the south of Bermuda.
Gulf is definitely a green light for tropical development right now. Now what will happen is about the next 10 to 14 days or so, long-term models have suggested some type of development taking place out in the Western Caribbean. Now what will happen is it will track northward into parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and at least the model that I saw earlier from the GFS at about 10 to 12 days out, it will likely try to position itself around southern Texas and in parts of Louisiana. And that's something we're really watching closely, because you talked about it, very low wind shear at all levels of the atmosphere.
Yes, and once again, long-term models, so be skeptical with them. They can easily change over the next few days, but right now we are keeping an eye, especially on the Gulf of Mexico, prime conditions, hot sea surface temperatures, low minimal wind shear. It's really that time of the year that we do see these major hurricanes starting to pop up.
Absolutely. Speaking about the time of the year, for tropical frequency, this time of year closing in on September 1st, not that far away, just a few days away now, we're going to see the peak continuing to increase. A little after September, we actually hit that peak where we see the highest amount of tropical storms and hurricanes. And you can see right here in this shaded darker red color, you can see the more favorable conditions for major hurricanes a little after September as well. So definitely still got a bit of time, at least in the next few weeks, to keep our eyes open for some tropical storm and hurricane development.
And statistically speaking, September 10th is the day for the peak of hurricane season, generally when we see the most tropical cyclones form, especially major hurricanes as well, Category 3 upwards to Category 5.
Absolutely. So once again, just to wrap everything up tonight, we had Chantal weakening in the northern Atlantic. That's just going to become stationary over the next several days. Not going to be any impact to land. That's going to be good news, but if you are a fish, you might be dealing with some pretty rough surf out there. Disturbance right over the Bahamas, and of course,
Bermuda High repositions itself well off towards the open Atlantic and strengthening. So what that means, more of a direct flow, could potentially impact the continental U.S. even further down the road.
That's right. Thank you for joining us on Tropical Thursdays. We hope to see you here next week.